Starting off, we actually have this interview from Tucker Carlson. Now, Tucker Carlson flew all the way to Russia to actually interview one of the quote-unquote president of Russia. If you are like me, you are wondering if he was actually going to ask the right questions, if he was actually going to give him a big softball interview, if he was going to just let him say whatever he wants without any pushback whatsoever. I did not find this to be true in this interview. I watched the whole entire thing. It was 2 hours and 30 minutes. It was a very long interview, and it was very, very interesting. It's not like Tucker Carlson just let Putin just say whatever the heck he wanted and then that's it. No, he pushed back multiple times. But one of the times that I find the most interesting is when Tucker actually asks, why is Russia invading Ukraine now? This is a very interesting question. He answers in a 30-minute long speech about the history of Ukraine and Russia and how Ukraine actually is part of Russia. He also says that NATO said that it would not expand eastward, but there has been no writing of this, so it is all hearsay. I actually talked about this when the war first started. I actually have this here on YouTube, and it's going to be available on X if you do want to check that out as well. I actually talked about the fact that America is building laboratories in Ukraine to test viruses of high chances of it actually escaping. By the interview, it doesn't seem as though that was an aspect at all for Putin, and it did not change his mind whether he wanted to invade Ukraine or not invade Ukraine, because he only cares about getting the land back that quote-unquote belongs to Russia. Now, Tucker asked Putin, why did you invade Ukraine now and not when you first took over, if this was true? And Putin says that he was trying to talk to some presidents in America about his research and see if America would be on his side before he did anything. He says that since America did not want to let Russia into NATO, then he had no other choice but to go to China and team up with them. He then goes on to say that America has its own problems, like the debt problem, and he thinks that it's funny that America is helping Ukraine with their borders, but we can't secure our borders in America, which is not wrong at all. Then he goes on to say a bunch of stuff about the war and all of the misinformation that the media is telling us. I think that it was a very, very informative interview. And at the first 30 minutes of the interview, Tucker Carlson actually comes on and says, listen, I know you guys are actually not really wanting this 30-minute expose about the history of Russia and Ukraine and stuff like that. And we thought it was just all not answering the question. But then when you actually keep watching and keep listening to the interview, it's really not dodging the question whatsoever. I don't know how to explain it. It was just nice and refreshing to see a world leader actually know what they're talking about, not stumble and mumble all the time. Now, I felt as though I was just watching a conversation between two guys, and I didn't really feel like it was more of like an interview type thing. I think it was more of a conversation, and Putin wanted it to be like that because he didn't want to just talk to another media head. He just wanted to talk to Tucker Carlson about the history and exactly why he did stuff. Like I said, it's a very, very interesting conversation that they had. So if you do want to check that out, you probably already did, but if you do want to check that out, I strongly recommend checking that out. Now, I'm going to show a clip of one of my favorite segments of the interview here. A lot of segments are going viral on Twitter now because of the fact that it's very, very interesting, but I do really recommend that you watch the whole entire thing for full context.
To use the dollar as a tool of foreign policy struggle is one of the biggest strategic mistakes made by the US political leadership. The dollar is the cornerstone of the United States power, but they won't stop printing. What does the debt of $33 trillion tell us about? As soon as the political leadership decided to use the US dollar as a tool of political struggle, a blow was dealt to this American power. I would not like to use any strong language, but it is a stupid thing to do and a grave mistake. Look at what is going on in the world. Even the United States allies are now downsizing their dollar reserves. Seeing this, everyone starts looking for ways to protect themselves. But the fact that the United States applies restrictive measures to certain countries, such as placing restrictions on transactions, freezing assets, etc., causes grave concern and sends a signal to the whole world. Do you even realize what is going on or not? Does anyone in the United States realize this? What are you doing?
Now, with that being said, we're going to be digging into the headlines of the week. So digging right in, we actually have a Daily Wire article. We have Special Counsel Biden fully retained disclosed classified materials, but no charges warranted. So now, let me get this straight. We are going to try to charge Donald Trump in a classified document scheme, but then we don't want to charge Joe Biden in the same exact scheme. It does not even make any sense, even though Joe Biden had a lot more documents than Trump, because of the fact that, and even if he didn't even have more documents, he was just keeping it inside of his garage with his Corvette. Trump was not keeping it inside of his unlocked garage that his degenerate son had access to. No. And Trump never had Chinese officials come to his house personally at all. So I'm just not understanding what the same thing is here. So if they're going to drop one, they can't drop, I mean, they have to drop the latter. If they're going to drop Joe Biden's, they have to drop Trump's. And if they're going to drop Trump's, then they have to drop Joe Biden's. So you see what I'm saying here? You can't have one without the other. It does not make much sense. So moving with the article. The special counsel investigating President Joe Biden's handling of classified materials said in a report released on Thursday that it had no criminal charges warranted against Biden, even though he willfully retained and disclosed classified materials after his time as vice president. The investigation was led by special counsel Robert Hur, a Trump-era United States attorney who was appointed by General Merrick Garland. Quote, "We conclude that no criminal charges are warranted in this matter." The report's executive summary began. "We would reach the same conclusion if the Department of Justice policy did not foreclose criminal charges against the sitting president." Quote, "Our investigation uncovered the evidence that President Biden willfully retained and disclosed classified materials after his vice presidency when he was a private citizen," the report concluded. These materials included 1. Marked classified documents about military and foreign policy in Afghanistan, and 2. Notebooks containing Mr. Biden's handwritten entries about issues of national security and foreign policy implicating sensitive intelligence sources and methods. FBI agents recovered these materials from his garage, offices, and basement den in Mr. Biden's Wellington, Delaware home. The report said that marked classified documents about Afghanistan, which included classification markings up to the top secret sensitive compartment information level. "We found in Biden's garage in Delaware, notebooks containing classified information were discovered in the basement den of Biden's Delaware home. Some of the classified documents that were found at the Biden Penn Center were intelligence assessments on Iran and were related to the Obama administration's Joint Consecutive Plan of Action, otherwise known as the Iranian nuclear deal. Classified documents were also found at the University of Delaware, where Biden was storing his records from the time in the United States Senate that appeared to be related to the Europe at the time of his Senate Foreign Relations Committee." The report argued that the prosecutors did not believe the evidence was sufficient enough to Biden because jurors would find reasonable doubt for several reasons, ranging from Biden's authority to keep classified documents at home and serious memory issues to serious memory issues. Okay, so they're going to sit here and try to play two things at the same exact time. They're going to try to say, oh no, well, Joe Biden, he's senile. He doesn't remember anything. That's why he took the documents home. And then at the same exact time, they're going to turn around and they're going to say, well, Joe Biden, he's the most competent man I know. And, he got this thing in the bag and he's going to win the presidency and he's as sharp as ever. It's like a sharpened pencil, my guy. He knows how to exactly do all of these things and more that Trump can do, but that's not true at all. It's definitely not true. If you are trying to use two different sides in the court of law, it does not make any sense here. I mean, look at the guy. He's not competent at all. But we do have another information spread. So this time we do have a Twitter thread. So this is an expose from Matt Walsh. He actually talked about this a few days ago and it's very, very interesting here. So he has obtained internal footage of senior officials at FAA's Flight Program Operations Division, which is responsible for all aspects of aircraft operations, worshipping a plan to reduce the number of white males in aviation. The footage begins with FAA Acting Deputy Chief Operating Officer Angela McCloin saying more workers need to go from ramp to cockpit, meaning she wants more baggage handlers becoming airline pilots, which is just disgusting. So let's actually watch the clip here.
And we're looking at that, but we're also looking at really a need across the agency to recruit and retain a diverse population of folks. And as you mentioned earlier, how much that adds to the process. What do you think are some of the key points that we need to remember as we embark on this challenge going forward?
That's a pretty good question. I think one of the things we need to now is that everyone else is embarking on the same thing, right? Just across the system. So competition is going to be it's just going to be really heavy, right? So I think we need to know that. I think it's going to take some creativity. You heard Tim saying he and I had talked about, and we're going to you all is, are there opportunities for any partnerships with universities or trade schools that specialize? We kind of talked about from, ramp to cockpit. Is there some things that we would want to look at there?
Okay, yeah, that's just disgusting. Why are we even looking at the potential of getting baggage carriers to the cockpit? Doesn't make any sense. If we have long-time aviation aspired people in the field, and we're saying, listen, we know that you worked your whole entire life to this moment right here. You've been testing, you've been doing all these flight simulators, you've been out in the real world flying your own plane. Let's get you up into the cockpit right now because we really need pilots. And I think that you are a good opportunity. There's a good opportunity for you, and this would be a great opportunity for all of us if we have good trained people in the cockpit. But of course, they don't want to do any of this. They just want to sit here and say, well, no, you know what? This person right here, this Sally Joe, that's the baggage climber. Yeah, you're gonna get in the cockpit right now. That doesn't make any sense here. As the meeting goes on, McClaw declares that it's important to get a little uncomfortable. She explains that flight operations is white male dominated, and tells the managers that they need to talk about what the future could look like.
Yeah, we need to be willing to have a conversation about kind of what's standing in our way from approaching some of these things uh, differently than we have historically approached them, and just even the internal bias. I mean, particularly in flight ops, your whole program is very heavily male dominated. It just is. And really, it is white male dominated. Let's just say what it is. And so let's be willing, that is today what it is. And then let's talk about what could the future look like if we really had this program that was representative.
Okay, that doesn't make any sense. So now we're going to look at people's skin color and say, yes, you can get the job. Yes, you cannot. No, you can't get the job. Like, it doesn't make any sense here. You're going to hire people based off of the ability for them to get the job done. You're not going to hire people based off of what? Based off of your perceived... I just not understanding. It's not even at all making any sense. It just doesn't make any sense. If you're gonna sit here and say, okay, well, this person needs to get hired in the basis of skin color, would you allow that on the opposite side? No, you wouldn't. It doesn't make any sense here. You're not gonna hire a white person just because they're white. You're not gonna hire a black person just because you're black. You're gonna hire them for the ability to get the job done. That's the most important thing here, especially as a pilot. You're responsible for hundreds of lives. We're not going to mess around with that. In response, David Will Riggins, the FAA's Vice President of Flight Program Operations, says, that's great. Honestly, those are some words that I really need to spend some time digging through and thinking about. That doesn't make any sense.
No, that's great, honestly. Those are some words that we really need to spend some time, I think, kind of digging through and thinking about.
Yeah, okay, so I would not fly anytime soon. This footage, which is from April 2022, is a sign of much larger problem. Over the past couple of weeks, I've heard from several members of the aviation industry tell me that DEI is endangering the public and distracting them from their work. A second source, a pilot I've confirmed works at Delta, tells me that Delta has recently promoted a trans-identifying pilot who repeatedly received bad reviews from captains. According to the source, this pilot would likely not have survived probation if he wasn't trans. This is the message itself. We recently hired a transgender pilot, repeatedly received negative reviews during his first year probationary period from captains he flew with regarding attitude, CRM, and judgment. Yet the chief pilot's office, CPO, was unwilling to address the issue. Had this not been a transgender pilot, the individual would likely not have successfully completed their probationary period. Coincidentally, that CPO has a management pilot on staff who recently transitioned who is able to weigh in on these matters. The source also notes that Delta routinely makes exceptions for trans-identifying pilots considering grooming and behavioral standards intentionally. Delta has even published a lengthy guide for pilots who believe they were born in the wrong body. Helpful steps for transitioning at Delta. Does not make any sense whatsoever. Why is an airline even getting in the middle of this? This industry-wide embrace of overt mental illness affects every aspect of aviation. Another source told me that his job is to design advanced military systems, but he's constantly sidetracked by DEI proposals like gender-inclusive seatbelts. What is a gender-inclusive seatbelt? We hire college graduates with zero experience who get assigned a project and immediately start publishing this nonsense. For context, I work in a field where my job is to design military systems for a war fighter, and I have to deal with new hires pitching me ideas about gender-inclusive seatbelts. Companies are made out of two types of individuals: those who eat, sleep, and breathe DEI, ESG, the pronoun in their e-signature people, and those who keep their mouths shut and do the work. We have affirmation groups, projections, and heritage months for every single type of person except white men. If I don't have at least 2 DEI ESG meetings or trainings per week on my calendar, then all hands town hall meetings have some sort of DEI backed into the agenda. We constantly have lunches, dinners, happy hours, movie nights, holiday celebrations, all in the name of DEI, led by ESG champions, while the rest of us try to get our work done. It doesn't make any sense here. Several sources have sent me documentation about one of the FAA's largest owned corporations and socially and economically disadvantaged businesses for billions of dollars in critical grant funding. B1 General, the Master Ordering Agreement, MOA, applies to Electronic Field Aviation Administration, FAA, Accelerated and Simple Tasks, EFAST, and is available for use by the FAA and on limited basis when in the best interest of the government by all federal government agencies. This MOA functions as a blanket purchase agreement, BPA, to provide a broad range of technical, professional, and support services. Construction is not within the scope of this MOA. MOA sets forth the terms and conditions simplified to in governing contacts or task orders issued under MOA. 1. Master Ordering Agreement. EFAST is a set aside for small businesses, socially and economically disadvantaged businesses, SEDB, 8A, Service Disabled Veteran-Owned Small Businesses, SDVOSB, and 8A, Indian Tribal-Owned and Alaska Native Corporations, ANC. Other set-asides will be employed as set forth in the FAA's Accusation Management Systems, AMS. This MOA establishes fixed sailing labor rates for use in contacts or small orders. Terms and conditions of this MOA will flown down to the contracts or task orders issued under this MOA. It's only the matter of time until this combination of incompetence and anti-white discrimination leads to major air disaster. This aviation industry needs a complete new mandate and one that's focused solely on safety before a lot of people die. Of course, because when is the next time that we're going to see a major situation unfold because of the fact that they just hired a bunch of people that are not qualified for the job? It's just disgusting, and especially at Delta. For me, I fly Delta all the time, and it's very, very disappointing when I see people that are just not competent in their job and not only does the flight get delayed, but everybody else is at danger now because of the fact that we're sitting here trusting our lives with a person that did not get the full experience, get the full training as everybody else just because of the skin color that they have. Why do we think this way about certain people in the cockpit, or why do we think this way about certain people working in the workplace? That's because of the fact that we constantly push ideals just like this one, where we allow people to just get in when they have no qualifications for the job. It's disgusting. With that being said, we're going to be moving into the media's takes.
No, I'm not a writer. Okay.
So moving with the media's takes, we actually have a Daily Wire article. We have Clarence Thomas, Corner's attorney in Trump ballot case, by asking for disqualification examples. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas clashed on Tuesday with a lawyer who argued in favor of Colorado removing former President Donald Trump from the primary ballot under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, an insurrection clause dating back to the Civil War. Jason Murray, and the attorney who appeared in behalf of Colorado voters challenging Trump's eligibility over his actions leading up to the United States Capitol breach on January 6, 2021, struggled to come up with instances of national candidates being disqualified by states when pressed by justice. Thomas asked Murray if he had any examples with the justice qualified as being shortly after the adoption of the 14th Amendment, where the states disqualified national candidates, not its own candidates. Murray referred to one instance petitioning to an 1868 congressional election in Georgia and said that he thought it was not surprising that there was a few examples because at the time, candidates were write-in and they were party ballots. So states didn't run the ballots the same way, and there wouldn't have been a process for determining before an election whether a candidate was qualified, unlike the processes we have now. Thomas countered by saying during the Reconstruction era, there would still be a plethora of Confederates still around who might run for state or national offices, suggesting that there would be a few examples of national candidates being disqualified if your reading is correct. Murray contested that certainly there were national candidates disqualified by Congress refusing to seat them, to which Thomas shot back by reminding the lawyer that we are talking about states disqualifying national candidates. Other than the example I gave, no, but again, Your Honor, it's not surprising because then wouldn't have been. States certainly wouldn't have the authority to removing sitting federal officer, Murray said. An exchange continued. Thomas explored the purpose of Section 3, saying that the clause sought to address the concern that former Confederate states would continue being bad actors, and the effort was to prevent them from doing this. Thomas poised that the thinking behind Section 3 is not authorizing the South to disqualify national candidates. And yet he summed that idea underlies the argument made by Murray to keep Trump off the ballot. He again pressed Murray for examples. Murray said historians filed belief in support of the case, making that the point that the idea of the 14th Amendment was that both states and the federal government would ensure rights, and that if states failed to do so, the federal government certainly would also step in. The lawyer went on to repeat that the reason there are not more examples was because elections worked differently in the 19th century. States have a background power until Article 2 in the 10th Amendment to run presidential elections, Murray said, adding that they did not use that power to police ballot access until the about 1890s, when everyone had recently received amnesty. In these issues, so it just doesn't even make any sense now because Murray has no argument anymore. He's sitting here saying that in 1890 or whatever, it was a different time. But now he's using examples from that time. So you just contradicted yourself? Yeah, I think you did. Moving on to the next article, we actually have a Daily Wire article. We have White House fumes over special counsel report highlighting Biden's poor memory. President Joe Biden's White House counsel erupted over the special counsel's report from the criminal investigation into Biden's handling of classified material. We already read it, but the report summarizes Biden's mental fitness could be highly damaging to his re-election campaign, as America's voters, overwhelmingly 76% have concerns about the 81-year-old's mental and physical health. Mr. Biden's memory was sufficiently limited during his recorded interview with the ghostwriter in 2017, with whom he shared classified materials, in his interview with our office in 2023. The special counsel report said that in its executive summary, quote, "We have also considered that at trial, Mr. Biden would likely present himself as to the jury, as he did during our interview of him, as systematic, well-meaning elderly man with poor memory." Prosecutors said that based on the way Biden presents, jurors will, quote, "want to identify reasonable doubt, in that it will be, quote, difficult to convince a jury that they should convict him, by then a former president well into his 80s, of a serious felony that requires a mental state of willingness." Okay, so again, They're saying that he does not have the mental capacity to do stuff, and then he's saying that at the same exact time, yes, he does have enough mental capacity to lead the greatest world and the greatest country in America if we ever get into a war. Doesn't make much sense here. You cannot do both at the same exact time. It is I'm just not understanding here. How can you make both claims? The lawyers complained that the special counsel did not take issue with the witness who was interviewed who could not remember past details even though they were not under criminal investigation. Unlike Biden, Biden's lawyers attempted to downplay the seriousness of his memory problems, arguing his inability to recall dates or details of the events that happened years ago is neither surprising nor unusual. However, as special counsel's report outlines, many details that Biden struggled to remember were major events and showed clear signs of memory issues during recordings for when he was interviewed by a ghostwriter in 2017. The interview with ghostwriter, with whom Biden shared classified material, showed that even then, Biden was struggling to remember events and straining at times to read and relay his own notebook entries. The special counsel said, adding that even in 2017, he was showing signs of demolished facilities in faulty memory. In his interview with our office, Mr. Biden's memory was worse, Murr said. And we already read that you referred to President Biden's memory on at least 9 occasions, a number that is itself gracious. Biden's lawyers complained, but even among those 9 instances, your report varies. It is one thing to observe President Biden's memory as being sufficiently limited on certain subjects. It is quite another to use more sweeping and highly prejudicial language employed later in the report. The language is not supported by the facts, nor is it appropriately used by the federal prosecutor in this context. I completely agree fully. Yeah, and obviously I agree fully. If you were the president of the United States, you should be expected to at least remember somewhat of what you did a few years ago. And if it's not if it's not important things, then yeah, I get it. But if trying to remember stuff for your court date, how about if you refer back to your notes and you refer back to your notes and you can't even read it? It doesn't make a lot of sense here. You're the one that took the note. Moving on to the next article, we actually have a Federalist article. We have Molly Hellingway breaks down everything wrong with the United States elections, from mail-in ballots to Zuckbucks to censorship. Mail-in ballots, the private takeover of elections with Zuckerbucks, big tech censorship, and Democrat meddling are the biggest ways the American system of self-governance is under attack. Federalist editor-in-chief and best-selling author Molly Hellingway warned in her testimony to the House Administration Committee, quote, "We have allowed the private takeover of government elections offices by bipartisan oligarchs and their enemies of the activists who use these offices and their authorities to tilt the election towards favored candidates," she said. During her opening statement on Wednesday, Hellingway diagnosed the dictatorial of United States elections and Americans' trust in the voting process as a result of lengthy election seasons. Quote, "The situation is so absurd that we have presidential and gubernatorial debates weeks after some people have already voted. Mail-in voting specifically," Hemingway said, "focuses on the crux of voting to begin months before Election Day. Quote, "Instead of having full security and verifiable chain of custody for ballots being issued, and counted, we flooded addresses across the country with tens of millions of unsupervised mail-in ballots months ahead of elections, frequently to locations from which voters, if they're even alive, have long since moved, instead of having election administration that is rigorously nonpartisan and impartial under the law," she said. Hemingway said that this strategy not only applied in the 2020 election, but is also being weaponized by Democrats in the 2024 election cycle to prevent former President Donald Trump from receiving support at the polls. Quote, "Instead of voters being able to vote for the candidate of their choice, powerful interests backed by wealthy oligarchs are working to remove the most popular candidate and the ruling party's chief opponent from the ballot in a move reminiscent of Soviet Russia." Hemingway said, and if that wasn't enough, instead of the top candidates being chosen by the people being able to fully engage in vigorous campaign heading into an election, we have one side actively attempting to throw its opponent in prison and bankrupt his family, again, reminiscent of Soviet Russia, instead of system of law that gives Americans the same rights and due processes. The Department of Justice, other partisan actors, and partisan juries, Hemingway said, play key roles in the latest election meddling scheme, but they are not alone. Quote, we have a press that is almost exclusively the arm of one political party and is so corrupt that it is willing to perpetrate hoax after hoax against opposition party members instead of vibrant public square where Americans can debate issues and express their strongly held views. Hemingway said that in addition to the corrupt corporate media, Biden tech used this internet power to influence election outcomes. We have an elaborate censorship industrial complex where the government works hand in hand with tech oligarchs to suppress the blacklist debate on all of the important issues that contribute to election outcomes. She noted, that is something I know firsthand because of our government worked with tech companies to censor me for my election reporting. As Hemingway described in her 2021 book, nonprofit groups with very strong ties to the Democratic Party are founded by one of the world's wealthiest and most powerful men. Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg took over government election offices most notably in the Democratic areas of swing states. The introduction of Zuckbucks to American elections, Hemingway said, was just the beginning of a widespread and glowing campaign by partisans to further infiltrate government offices to ensure favorable outcomes. Allowing just one of these attacks to infect our national election system would be a crisis. Allowing all of them at the same time is an existential threat to our system of self-government, Hemingway cautioned. And I completely agree. If we're going to sit here and let anybody control our election system, control the flow of information to us, the voters, then we're going to be misinformed when it comes down to election time, and that's a very upsetting thing. With that being said, thank you all for watching. Thank you all for listening. And if you do want to stay up to date with all of the election information, then please like and subscribe down below because I do have new episodes of my show every single Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for enjoying, and I hope they have a great rest of your day. The Demetrius Rujo Show is copyright 2024 Rujo Studios. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for enjoying, and I hope they have a great rest of your day. Bye.